together reflect the driving of team. That's why in the process we also have job roles. So now we're going to talk more about the development artifacts, the quality artifacts, and the meetings involved in making sure the process is being executed with rhythm and with control, with monitoring methods such as the meetings. So first of all, we're going to spend time to talk about the requirement management or the requirement space. So I often emphasize a requirement space really represents a conceptual product, meaning the requirement space, which consists of requirement theme, epic, spec, really represent conceptually what is a product in the product owner's brain or in a group of people's view of the product that in your designing, in your brain image. So a theme represents a group of requirements. Together they form some big areas of the one aspect of the product for its behavior, such as how are we going to increase the website traffic if we're going to create a content sharing website. And a theme consists of multiple epic. An epic often represents a bigger idea. It's not normalized, meaning it could be 20 days big. It could be 2 months big. It requires 5 team members and working together for about 2 weeks. It's big. So as a result, an epic, if you directly assign epic to a development team, it's really going to mess them up because nobody can really take the challenge of such a big task, such a big assignment, and how do you break them down? At the end of a sprint, most likely the development team cannot finish the work, so they have to keep delaying the assignment to the next sprint and to the next sprint. That's just not work for creating a self-driving team. Instead, we use spec to break them down. So a spec, an epic can be broken into many, many specs. So hopefully each spec is about 3 days big and 5 days big, at least, no more than 5 days, I would say. So as the spec become committed, you start to assign the requirement spec into the development space. And we use the term story to represent a commitment or an assignment of a requirement spec. Once the story is assigned, you start to estimate how much time it's going to take for the Agile team members to finish the story. But you do this time estimate based on the task, meaning one story might create multiple tasks. And I think a better picture here is each story have 2 or 3 tasks instead of 1 to 1. Anyway, story is broken into multiple tasks. It's the task represent the driving unit of an Agile team that will be used to drive the implementation effort so that the story becomes implemented to become the working software. So let's kind of summarize the requirement theme, where epic, spec, story, and task are organized so that requirements get represented So requirement is a tree. Epic spec is the stem and the branch of the tree. Then the question, if you think about, if so, a requirement is a tree, then if spec is just the branch or the stem, and epic, then without a leaf, how can you have a live tree? I think it's indeed true that in order to have a tree full of life, you need a leaf. And the leaves are actually the document attachment. So spec, actually, while it's so beautiful, we refer them as the quantified requirement. It's an abstract of what you need to do. And the detail of a requirement often need to be represented with documents. And that often will be added at later time. So once you have the requirement space, you have the quantified spec. Now you're ready to assign the spec into the development space to create stories. Story 1-1, 1-2 represent the two copies of the same requirement spec 1 that need to be committed, assigned into a development sprint number 1 in order to create the working software to contain the function represented by spec 1. Sometimes a requirement like a spec 2 and spec 3 need to be assigned to a product backlog. Release backlog is same as a product backlog. A release backlog just means it's not committed to the product version 9, so it becomes a release backlog. But release backlog is a product backlog. So sometimes you will assign a spec into a product backlog, broken them down into multiple development tasks, then estimate each of the time required and the size of the development task to enable the team to understand the story better before such story get committed into development sprint. Or sometimes we just commit the requirements back directly to a development sprint. So here is a sample requirement space. It happened to be the Dev Suite version 9.2. As you can tell, this actually, the left side is real, the right side is kind of a not so real, but kind of real for our real project related to our product Dev Suite, which is ALM platform product. So we have 9.2, 9.2.1 as a patch release, and 9.3, and 9.5, 9.6. As you select one of them, you see the entire requirement tree, where requirement consists of sometimes epic. This green colored icon represent an epic, which is a big idea of we're going to do a word adding functions, and it might need to be broken down into multiple spec later time. And often you just have create a spec directly because you know this is not a so big item, such as support DevTrack Windows client, which is big enough actually, and support cross-project report in DevTrack. And often you have attachment, so you can open the attachment. And there's a special type of requirement called Word Document Epic. A Word Document Epic itself contains, of course, the content written in Word. But inside the Word document, you actually create spec. In other words, you create one level or multiple level of the child specs of a Word document which represent a big idea and epic, that need to be broken down. As you break a big Word document into smaller pieces, where some section of the Word document represent actually an itemizable spec. Such spec becomes living in the Word, but can be extracted, can be imported into a LM system to track individually for the total traceability. Since I believe in the convenience of using Word document, since I also believe that as the technology improves, the contents inside a Word document can be itemized to drive the traceability. That's why in the methodology, often I do not use any of the terms related to any tool, any technology. But I'm sorry, but the word epic actually is used, because I believe being a chief architect of driving a TechXL, who is, I think, is a pretty good vendor in terms of LM solutions, we suffered. We tried really hard to use different technology to manage requirements. We use wiki. We use all kind of methods, try to help our customer to have a nice tool to manage the requirement easily, and yet giving them, we want to give them the total traceability. Any requirement can be used to drive the quality definition as well as the development process. At any time, a requirement change can flag the owner of a task and the owner of a test case standard and the owner of a test case task. That requirement has been modified. But we came back to the conclusion that Word document is still the easiest way of managing the requirement. And once we prove that individualized requirement spec can be living in the Word document, I get myself committed that here is a way, an epic document in Word. But look at this requirement 1 is itemized inside the Word. It gets imported into any LM system to drive the life of the requirement, the traceability. Not only you can analyze the requirement by just manually selecting a section of the requirement contents, Word contents, to represent a requirement spec, you can actually use standard outline and a section heading rules to automatically extract all the requirement living in a Word document, not only one level, but multiple levels. So what is an epic? What is a spec? Yes, it is a requirement. But the requirement, it's only represent abstract. It just represents a big idea as an epic, and a smaller idea or a smaller requirement unit, which has two natures. It's small enough. It's going to take less than 5 days. It has meaningful value to an end user. A potential customer look at this set of requirements, smiles, meaning, oh yeah, if the vendor is delivering this kind of enhancement or this kind of new features or this kind of bug fixing, we're happy. But the requirement spec often doesn't have the detail. The detail often lives in the design document and the customer request document and the business logic explanation document. And such documents do not need to exist initially, or if they do exist, such documents often will be modified at a later time. And yet, the spec can be created, permanently exist. Because, the spec one simply say, this is the way we're going to improve the login password request reset. We say it's going to be easy, and it's going to be anybody visible to any users so that requesting a password reset does not require a phone call. It's an abstract of the ideas, but it does not necessarily have the user interface design. It does not necessarily need to have the UML or even the business logic explanations, and these will be improved during the process. That's why a requirement spec is so dynamic that it drives the development, but the development itself, the working software, will help you to finalize the requirement details. That's the beauty of requirement-driven SpecDD. So what is the relationship between requirement and the product backlog?